'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Well, I'm no mouse, but let me welcome you to this final entry in the TooFatLardies Christmas Advent Calendar for 2024. Christmas Eve is here, and no doubt many of you will be hanging up your wargaming stockings on the mantelpiece by the chimney tonight, and I hope that St. Nicholas is able to leave something very wonderful in them for you. Now, what a pleasure it's been for us to share with you some of our muses over the last few weeks, and we hope you've enjoyed them. So it does fall for me today to open door 24, the final door on the Advent calendar. So let me reach for the calendar now and open the window. It says the Holy Grail. That's a rather apt topic perhaps for Christmas Eve. The Holy Grail, given unlimited time and expense, which miniature figures, models or terrain would you make or print, and how would you use that? Wow, unlimited time and expense, that's certainly a dream come true. We'd all like unlimited time to do many things in life, and budgets are often a massive constraint. So to remove those constraints, unlimited time and unlimited budget, what would we be able to do? People say, don't they, that we've never had it so good in the hobby. I'm sure we could all say we'd like it better, though. And I guess that this is what continues to drive so much of our excellent creativity in the hobby. People saying we can always do things that are better. And I guess in unlimited time, we would make the hobby as fantastic as it could possibly be. So there are always things that could be better, aren't they? So I guess what this is getting at is really a chance for me to dream. And what better time than Christmas to dream about what material things we have in the hobby that we can enjoy. What would I do with unlimited time and unlimited budget? I think one of the things that with war games that often constrains us is the question of scale. We're forever taking a battle and breaking it down into its smaller parts or its component parts and focusing in on a small area of action. Typically, we're taking what might be a few 100 yards or could be maybe even a few 100 miles and condensing that down onto a board or tabletop that we can fit inside the average dining room. Now, of course, one of the consequences of this is that we also scale down the units that we represent. So depending on the scale of the game that we're playing and depending on the scale of the figures that we choose to use, we normally would expect to see one model representing more than one of whatever it is that they're trying to represent. So many games, we will see one figure representing many men or one vehicle representing many vehicles. And I completely understand why we have to do this for the sake of scale and the sake of playability. But there is still in my head, at least, something that doesn't feel quite right about it. It is, I think, the same kind of feeling that I get when I watch reenactors or living history groups, as I think they're more commonly called, when they recreate big battles of history, when we're asked to suspend judgment for the moment and allow ourselves to imagine that the 14 men in front of us, wearing wristwatches and metal-rimmed spectacles, are representative of the old guard at Waterloo. We just, even though they look fantastic and even though they researched their topic brilliantly well and they look individually wonderful, they just don't look like a full division. And it's that ability to capture those massed ranks, those massed organisations that I think I would want to throw some of my money at. What I mean by that is I don't want to, create a one-to-one scale. I don't want to dress people up so I can see the Battle of Waterloo laid out for real on the real Waterloo battlefield, although, of course, that would look rather splendid. That for me wouldn't be quite the same. It's just not the same though, is it? If we try to condense things down too much. 8 men, for instance, on the war games table. 8 men does not a battalion make. And this might be music to the ears of Ken Riley. Hello, Ken. And the big battle gamers. But, folks, even your big battle gamers, even your big units are not big enough to represent units at 1-to-1 scale, typically. When we play sharp practice, or most particularly when we play Chain of Command, we can represent units at 1-to-1 scale. In Chain of Command, of course, we have at the centre of the game the infantry platoon, who are mostly represented on a 1-to-1 scale. So it's okay for you to paint a corporal, and that figure will represent the corporal. If you paint a man with a Bren gun, he will represent a person on the field equipped with a Bren gun. And this 1-to-1 nature of Chain of Command actually is something that really appeals to me. What I see is the miniature version of what was really there. It's not just 8 men representing 800 men. Of course, it's harder to do that in big scales. And for war games tables, of course, we have to combine playability with practicality. I did at one stage, it did at one stage occur to me that this might be easy enough to do, really. So, I remember many years ago, a good friend of mine had a book, and in that book was, if I recall rightly, the roll call for the Royal North British Dragoons at Waterloo, a unit, of course, more commonly known to many of us as the Scots Greys. And I can even remember to this day some of the names of the troop commanders in that unit based on what he had written in that book. Remember, there was Captain Cheney with his troop and Captain Bernard with his troop. And I think in the Royal Scots Greys at Waterloo, if my memory serves me, there was something like 6 troops of the regiment on the field. And of course, within that somewhere was Sergeant Charles Hewitt, was the man who would most famously capture the eagle of the French 45th Line Regiment. I always wanted, as a young wargamer, to represent that unit 1-to-1 scale, just to be able to see an entire regiment of cavalry laid out before me. And to be able to do that in miniature would, I think, just give a different feeling of an action. To see a whole unit paraded out allows the understanding of the role that unit had and how it might manoeuvre, and just, how it would have appeared on the field of battle. So, as I say, it did at one stage occur to me that this would be easy enough to do in 6mm scale, but then there becomes a very pertinent question of, well, that's great, but what do you actually do with the unit like that? Once you've made it, once you've painted it, once you've made a 6-troop cavalry unit, what are you actually going to do with it all? Are you going to represent the Union Brigade in 1-to-1 scale, and then what? Do you upscale that even more to produce Durland's Corps in 1-to-1 scale? The further you go down the road, the more ridiculous the idea seems to be, but not if you've got unlimited time and an unlimited budget. It may be possible to do something like that. So this scale of appeal of 1-to-1, it works for Chain of Command, where units are deployed on the table at 1-to-1 scale, but I try to actually do this in some of my armoured units as well, where typically in Chain of Command we would deploy a platoon, and it may have 1 tank that supports it. That might be 1 tank on the table, but what I do is when I model the tank and its unit, I would typically model the entire troop, or possibly even the entire squadron, which would be a lot more tanks, and obviously more than you'd ever need for a game. But for instance, some of my World War II units are modelled at that scale, and while that means I have more figures than I will ever need, it does also mean that I can lay the unit out and I can see what it actually looks like. I can see what it looks like to have it deployed, and I think that's important when you're considering the way that units handle on the tabletop. And you have to recognise that very often what we deploy may only be the very tip of the spear. And also we can recognise that when we do deploy a cavalry unit of 8 men, it represents something much more significant, and to have in our mind's eye a vision of what it actually is that it represents. And that can help us handle that unit more realistically, both as a commander and as a war games rules designer. So I think that if I were lucky to have unlimited time and unlimited budget, and most importantly unlimited space in which to store and lay out these ridiculously scaled toys, then I would very much like to be able to recreate actions in as close to one scale as would be possible given the size of the figures. So I don't know how big a table that would mean that I would need, for instance, to have a refight of the Battle of Waterloo in 28mm, but it would need to be quite big. Or whatever historic action we go for. It would certainly be an absolute bucket list, however, to be able to do something like that. And one-to-one scale gaming has a huge appeal to me for that very reason. I wonder how large we can really go with one-to-one scale. But I think to some degree the question here misses a trick. Dreams about the miniature figures, the scale models and the terrain are all the material items of our wargaming. And whilst I really do want to share that bucket list of what it might be that we could do with unlimited time and money for the toys that we have, we have to think about the spiritual side of our gaming community, and that we should celebrate that. And what could we do with unlimited time and unlimited budget in that space? Unlimited time gives us the time to play more games with more friends in more places around the world. Unlimited budget, of course, allows us to ensure that those games are with beautiful figures on beautiful tables and are well resourced and played in fantastic venues where we can enjoy endless hobby time surrounded by all the paraphernalia that one requires to maximise the enjoyment, and presumably allows us to extend gratitude and gifts to those around us. How more Christmassy can you be than extending gratitude and gifts to those around you? Because we have an endless budget, which presumably means therefore we can subsidise everyone else in the hobby so that they too have an endless budget. I think there's something here in the messages of good King Wenceslas that we can learn from, where we can spread our gratitude to those less fortunate than ourselves, and we can all have the tables that we dream of for our wargaming. Well, there you go. I think that with that nonsense, dreamy nonsense, we have reached the end of this Advent calendar entry. And indeed, therefore, to the end of the TooFatLardies Advent calendar for 2024. I hope very much that you've enjoyed listening to the confused ramblings of Sydney, Richard and myself over the past 3 and a bit weeks as we enjoyed Advent and the lead up to Christmas. Today, of course, is Christmas Eve, and we hope that you are able to be with the people who are important to you and doing things that really matter this Christmas. But if you're not, or if indeed you have a window of opportunity that opens to you on Christmas morning, then I hope very much that you will find the time to join us with the Christmas Oddcast that we will be releasing on Christmas Day, where, like 3 not-so-wise men following a star, we will come to your stable bearing the gifts of laughter, banter and myrrh, whatever myrrh is. Merry Christmas.